So the series of videos I'm starting right now is geared toward my gaming students. This doesn't mean that other students will not benefit from it. You're welcome to take a look, and especially if you have an interest in games, especially even if you have an interest in playing multiplayer games, you'll recognize some of the components that I'm using to create this database. And so you can kind of jive with it a little bit better and maybe have a clearer idea of what all this SQL stuff is anyway and what this data management's all about. Um, Today we're starting on one-to-many queries, as has been kind of introduced in previous classes and videos, but now we're going to look at it from the perspective of a multiplayer game. So it's going to take a while to make our way through the entire example. Eventually I want to aim towards something that looks a bit like this. So you can see I've got lots and lots and lots of entities here, and we don't want these we don't want to get distracted by all of them all at once, so we're going to just take a small part of this and put it together today. I'm going to take the player, the character, and the class. And this diagram here is a simplified version of what each table would look like. So you'll notice some tables don't have, or some entities don't have attributes at all, and other ones have many attributes, but I kind of didn't mean for this particular diagram to be definitive. There's a lot that needs to be filled in here. So we're going to start with a small area, player, character, class, and we're going to work our way out, and we're going to find out what this inventory table is about. Why does it have, why is it a child table to both the character and the item? Why isn't item inventory? And a couple of other ideas that help us to build better databases. We'll get back to that over time, but again, we're going to focus on a small section. So for today, we're just looking at the player, character, and by extension, the class tables. So I've got player, and I forgot to bold that, so let's bold that now. So what I've done here is I've actually put in a full set of the attributes that belong to character marked off a primary key. Same thing for our player table. We may add other attributes later on in a future episode, if you will, but for now we are just going to stick to this. I don't want to put in too many columns. These character and player tables can get gigantic if you're not careful. Well, I mean, even if you are careful, because of the amount of data, the sheer amount of data that needs to be tracked about these things. So I'm focusing on a small number of columns so that we can stick to the concepts, but you should recognize the overall business concepts that are happening here. So our business rules, if you will, that's just an expression that means what rules are applied from the outside of the database in order for us to set our constraints and our relationships up in the database. So business rules. That applies to gaming. I realize that the term business doesn't sound like it applies to gaming, but business rules are just those rules that are set outside that we are required to write a database to enforce. So we've got player's first name, last name, email, registration date, and whether or not their account is currently active, because obviously it might get shut off. Perhaps this is a paid site and it might get turned off for non-payment. Maybe the player just wants their account shut down, and so on. Normally you'd probably have a password field in here, and maybe you might track the monthly fee that the player pays, and there's a bunch of other things that you might track about the player in here that we're not going to. We're going to keep it simple. In the character area, we've got the name for our character, what their level and current gold amount is. We could probably keep a track of what their current experience is for whatever level they're at while they're leveling up. There's lots and lots and lots of great things we could do here. We have their created date. We're probably going to use that to find out things like how long between people rolling alternate characters. We've also got their position X and Y, because I figure it's kind of cool that we can get a chance to do something a little geometric with our data, and it definitely applies directly to working inside of a game engine. So we're going to track potentially where a character logged out, and we're going to call this position X and position Y. Then we've got our class table, and all we're tracking about our classes is the name of the class. So assassin, warrior, mage, and cleric, and whatever other classes you can come up with. you can see that we have a crow's foot symbol going from the player table to the character table. That says one player has many characters. Makes sense so far. So we've got another crow's foot going from the class table to the character table, saying that for every one class, so there's a one side to our crow's foot, we have many. The many side of our crow's foot goes into characters. So for Assassin, for example, there could be hundreds of characters in our game. The character only has one class. That's kind of a business rule, but it's a rule that we're all familiar with. When you start up a game, most games offer you class selection. You have to choose a warrior or a mage or an archer or a priest or whatever classes that game happens to have. And so the business rule makes sense here. One character is not going to be many classes. Now they might also have several professions and stuff, but we are not learning about that type of relationship yet. We'll talk about that soon. For now, let's move on to the code. I've laid out our tables here. The only thing I haven't filled in is for character. I haven't filled in the foreign keys yet. So let's put in a player ID, and it's going to be an integer. And we'll make sure that it's a foreign key, so we're going to make it not null. Don't forget with Excel you can always double click this line between columns here. When your cursor turns into this kind of cross looking thing with the arrows on the side, you just double click. Or you can drag and drop it around as well. Alright, so we've got the player ID, we also need the class ID. It's going to be an integer, and it'll also be not null, foreign key. Now what that says is that I'm going to have a column in each character that tells me which player the character belongs to, and I'm going to have a column that tells me which class the character belongs to. And these IDs are foreign keys, or they have a foreign key constraint on them that says make sure that I don't put in a class ID here that doesn't already exist in the class table. And the same thing for player ID. We don't want to put in a player ID for a non-existent player, because then we have a character without a matching player, and characters can't exist without a player to play them.